Hey guys, Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist. I'm here in Bali, Indonesia. Wanted to talk about in a little video how folks, when they're going offshore for the first time, oftentimes make a big mistake that ends up causing them a lot of problems, costing them money, or even getting them in legal problems. And that is setting up their company, opening their bank accounts, doing their offshore business in the wrong places. This has been a real problem lately, and I've been hearing from some folks who followed advice from forums or shady lawyers or whatever else, and they ended up in this problem. So I want to explain how to avoid that and why this even exists. So the title of this video is Offshore Jurisdictions, Offshore Countries that just don't work anymore. And I think it's important to realize that when I say nomad capitalist, people think nomad means you're bouncing all around, that you're in 30 countries a year as I am. That doesn't have to be the case. There are people who can live the nomad capitalist lifestyle on their own terms and just live in one country and never travel. But the nomad part, what I've always said, what it really means is that things change. You have to be a little bit nomadic in your thinking. Even if you're not physically nomadic, the best banks, the best countries to do business, those things are going to change. I mean, I was born, at the time I was born, the United States was the #1 country in so many metrics. Now it is, in many cases, far from #1. So things change. That's the nomad part. You have to be flexible. And so what the folks who have come to me with problems, where their bank accounts got frozen, or they had trouble getting their money out of the country, or they had trouble doing business in the country, was largely because they were relying on information that used to work but doesn't work so much anymore. And in an era of the Panama Papers, the OECD, and other groups cracking down and trying to make things more and more difficult, you really have to be careful where you're going. And a lot of the traditional offshore jurisdictions have become very problematic these days. I'll give you an example. A guy recently came to me, runs a business doing some publishing, had a company in the Seychelles. Nobody wanted to do business with his Seychelles companies. His merchant account shut him down. His banks shut him down. He basically had nothing, and he had this Seychelles company that was owed a bunch of money actually by his merchant account provider, but they wouldn't pay him in the Seychelles. They're like, you got to set up a company somewhere else. The Seychelles is yesterday's news. And they're right. Now, it's a very unfortunate situation that we helped him get through, but the Seychelles, these tiny little islands, the places where there's no tax reporting, the places where there's no audits, no accounting, nothing required, kind of the wild, wild west. Those are useful for some situations, no doubt. There are some situations where that still works, and there are some kind of hybrid strategies where those can still work. But for a lot of folks, just on their face, a Seychelles company isn't that great anymore. BVI, any of the ones that were rather opaque, any of the ones where there are no requirements, because the high tax countries, the countries where you want to bank, the countries where you want to live, they're increasingly putting the screws to those countries and saying, you got to give us more information, you got to be more difficult on people, or we're just going to cut off your access. So in this guy's case, he had a bank account outside of Seychelles in a reputable jurisdiction that said, yeah, you know what, Seychelles, it's too dodgy for us anymore. We're cutting off ties, get your money out. We don't care where it goes, but we don't want your money. So a lot of the traditional offshore jurisdictions, the quote-unquote money holes, the ones that you hear talked about on sitcoms and dramatic TV shows that totally misunderstand the offshore world, those jurisdictions are becoming less and less relevant. It's becoming harder to do business there. Not for everybody, not in every case. Like I said, there are some cases, but just on the surface, these tiny islands somewhere don't work. And the same applies for banks. A lot of the banks in the Caribbean have become useless for American citizens just because a lot of them don't want US citizens. But for everyone, because you have high fees, you have really long wait times to get your money. You get asked so many questions, why is this money coming here? And the reason is because of all the crackdown on tax evasion, all the crackdown on everything else bad that's going on in the world, that chances are if you're watching this, you're not involved in. But if you go and bank in some tiny island in the Caribbean, they're going to have to ask you questions because there are no safeguards there to the extent that there are in the Western countries. Now, this is not a commentary on whether this is the right thing that should be happening. I don't do what's right or what's wrong. I've realized that being pragmatic is what's important for your business. So while I think that some of these crackdowns are a little aggressive, it is what's happening. And so when it comes to company formation and when it comes to bank account opening, going to tiny islands with no regulation where 20 years ago, people were just flying in with planes full of cash. That's not going to work for you anymore. Those days are basically over. And a lot of those companies have become very useless to people, and a lot of the bank accounts have become unable to send money out of those countries. So when we look at offshore jurisdictions, the future is going to be onshore in zero tax and very low tax onshore jurisdictions that have your reputation, that have some rules, and that make it easy. The offshore world per se, as in tiny islands, is really going the way of the dodo bird. And if you're still looking at opening your bank account or company there, it's probably better to get some help and figure out where might be a better idea to get the same solution, the same freedom, the same low tax, without all of the potential headaches, because there are even more headaches to come, I think, for the traditional offshore jurisdictions.